So Joe trotted out there or hobbled out there and proceeded to explain that gun violence in the United States is an international embarrassment. I do love it when presidents of the United States talk about how the United States is an international embarrassment. First of all, I don't care what the Europeans think of us. And I'm frankly confused by anyone who does care what the Europeans think of us. Why would I give a damn what the Europeans think of us? After hundreds of years of internecine warfare and then us saving their ass from the Soviets, I really could not care less what the French think of our gun laws in the United States. The French can stick it. Like, I don't care. Why would I possibly care what China thinks of our gun violence problem? China's too busy locking up Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. And why would I, like, who, why? Why would I care? How about if I judge our policy based on whether I think the policy does a good job of balancing risk, reward, and rights? How about that? The constant appeal by Democratic politicians to what the world thinks, I don't care. I don't understand why you would care. You're a member of the American democracy. If you want to live in Denmark, go live in Denmark. If you care that much what the folks in the Netherlands think, you are free to pick up and leave at any time. Let me explain. I don't give a I don't care. But here is Joe Biden explaining that we should deeply, deeply care about what the international community thinks of our gun violence problem. Listen, if you want to make the case that we ought to curb guns, the least effective case here is, yeah, what do the Australians think? Who cares? Here's Joe Biden trying to string together a sentence.
Gun violence in this country is an epidemic.
Nope.
Let me say it again. Gun violence in this country is an epidemic.
Nope.
And it's an international embarrassment.
And people clapping for that. Okay, first of all, it's not an epidemic. You know what's an epidemic? An epidemic. We just had one. We just had a giant global pandemic. It is finally coming to an end. Gun violence is not an epidemic because epidemics, they are things where you have a disease and then you pass that disease to someone else. No matter how many acts of gun violence are committed in the United States, it will not make me commit an act of gun violence randomly because it was passed to me on a bus. This sort of language is so stupid. It's like the CDC director today said that racism is a public health problem. No, racism is a problem of the human heart that has impacts in a wide variety of areas. It is not a public health problem. And gun violence is not an epidemic. Stop making comparisons between things that are not comparable. Okay, but it's on the basis of stupidities like this that he's going to push forward a bunch of crappy executive actions on guns. Joe Biden then continues along these lines, right? But the entire point here is that Joe Biden doesn't actually have, as we will see, any sort of rationale for his gun control proposals here. There's no shot in the world they actually lower the amount of violence using guns in the United States. They're not calibrated to do that. They're calibrated to please the radical left that has, again, a complete disconnect with reality when it comes to the causes of violence using guns. They believe that the way that you stop violence using guns is by barring obscure sort of things that are used by some gun owners without a lot of connection to crime. The actual way that you stop gun violence is the same way that you stop all violence. You put more cops on the streets. That's precisely the opposite of what they want to do. So what is this really about? If it's not about curbing the amount of violence using guns, and I say violence using guns rather than gun violence for a reason. There is a difference. Gun violence implies the gun is responsible for the violence, which is idiotic. It's like saying knife violence. It's like bomb violence. No, there's violence that uses these things as instrumentalities. In any case, what really is driving this? What's driving this is the American people think that Joe Biden has the feels, because that's all he's there to do, guys. He's the comforter in chief. Sure, he's pushing radical policy, but he's the comforter in chief. He's the most feeling, generous, emotionally deep human who's ever walked the planet. You know who will tell you this? The Joker, Kamala Harris.
President Joe Biden is a leader with great will, great determination, and even greater empathy. He has seen the grief of all of those who have lost a loved one to gun violence. It is for them, for all of us, that he will never, ever give up on this fight.
Okay, you know what's really funny about this? You remember when Vice President Pence used to do this kind of stuff with Trump? Right? You get out there and talk about how Trump was just the greatest human who'd ever lived, and the entire media would be like, look at this sycophant. Look at him over here, just massaging Trump. Well, Kamala Harris does this, and everybody's like, she's amazing. She's just incredible. By the way, I don't care might be a theme of today's show. I don't care about how empathetic Joe Biden is. I don't look to Joe Biden for empathy. I look to him to be president of the United States and to fulfill his constitutional duty. If I want empathy, I'll get a dog. If I want empathy, I'll go to my wife. I'll go to my kids. I'll go to my friends. I don't need empathy from the president of the United States. And if you're looking for empathy from your politicians, let me suggest that your life needs some fulfillment in it. If the place that you get your feels is from the politicians you support, you're creating a golden calf and then worshiping it. The White House comms director made the same point, however. Biden feels about this. He has feelings, guys. I mean, sure, those feelings might have some ramifications by making tens of millions of Americans felons for owning stuff that they already own. But he has feelings, and that's the important thing.
He's somebody throughout his entire career in public service who has been incredibly focused on gun reform. You know, he worked to pass the Brady bill when he was in the Senate. He worked to pass the assault weapons ban. This is something he feels incredibly powerfully about. And so the actions he's announcing today are the first step. He would be the first to say it's not enough.
He would be the first to say, this is what they always say. It's not enough. It's not enough as a substitute for it doesn't do anything that we want it to do. Right? It's not just not enough. It's not calibrated to solve the problem. Because what is the actual problem? The actual problem is that we have this incredible rise in crime across the United States that's been happening over the course of the last year. Emma Tucker and Peter Nikias over at CNN reported just a few days ago, quote, the U.S. saw significant crime rise across major cities in 2020, and it's not letting up. Major American cities saw a 33% increase in homicides last year. As a pandemic swept across the country, millions of people joined protests against racial injustice and police brutality, and the economy collapsed unrelated to the pandemic, a crime surge that has continued into the first quarter of this year. You may have noticed in their description of the problems last year, they did not include police were put under the gun, and then were told not to police anymore. Okay, that would be the actual reason, not the pandemic, because it turns out that in a lot of other areas of American life, and a lot of other areas of the country that are not major metropolitan areas, crime actually went down because people were staying at home. Okay, but the real reason that this is happening, of course, is because if you rip on the cops all the time, and then if you try to defund the cops, and there aren't enough cops on the streets, violence goes up. You may notice major American cities saw that 33% increase in homicides. Those are all Democratic areas. It is difficult to name a major American city in the United States that does not vote Democrat. Okay, the ones that are having the major spikes in crimes are the ones that already like Joe Biden, that already like his policies. Many of them have the same gun control policies that Joe Biden already wants nationally. Okay, the real answer to the violence with guns problems is the same as the solution to the violence problem generally, which is you need more cops on the streets. 63 of the 66 largest police jurisdictions saw increases in at least one category of violent crime in 2020. That includes homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, according to a report produced by the Major Cities Chiefs Association. Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Raleigh, North Carolina did not report increases in any of the violent crime categories. And CNN says it's nearly impossible to attribute any year-to-year change in violent crime stats to any single factor, and homicides and shootings are an intensely local phenomenon that can spike for dozens of reasons, but the increase in homicide rates across the country is both historic and far-reaching, as were the pandemic and social movements. Well, it ain't the pandemic. The pandemic is not the rationale for why people are murdering each other. The reason is because when you take the cops off the streets, and when you say the cops are bad, and when you have 20 million people in the streets marching against the cops stop doing their jobs. We had a bit of this in 2014, 2015 with the so-called Ferguson effect after Ferguson, Missouri, and now we are having this with the George Floyd effect. Okay, that is what is happening. But Joe Biden is not interested in solving that problem. In fact, Joe Biden is interested in precisely the opposite. The actual answer to the rising crime would be more cops. You know who used to know this? Joe Biden. Joe Biden was partially responsible for that 1994 crime bill that he now derides as having been racist. But that 1994 crime bill was instrumental in bringing down the crime rate in historic fashion in the United States. Crime rates in the United States soared from essentially 1968 to 1994, and then they started to come down. Why? Because localities and states put more cops on the streets, and there was greater federal funding available to put cops on the streets. You know who used to know that? Joe Biden. Well, now, Joe Biden is pushing precisely the opposite. According to MSNBC, Biden's new gun proposals are interested in investing in community-based solution, not incarceration. Except, of course, for the fact that if you want criminals off the streets, incarceration would actually be the solution to that particular problem.
The administration will also invest in evidence-based community violence intervention rather than incarceration.
Okay, well, that is not the solution. Okay, in fact, none of this is really designed to be the solution. So what exactly are these executive actions? According to the Daily Wire, in a statement, the administration outlined the following initial actions in his attack on gun rights. 1, the Justice Department within 30 days will issue a proposed rule to help stop the proliferation of ghost guns. So ghost guns are basically you buy a gun kit with the parts and then you put it together yourself. Let me just express that there is very little evidence that ghost guns are responsible for a large share of violence using guns in the United States. Okay, I'm unaware of any data suggesting that ghost guns are a major problem in terms of criminals who are using guns in the United States. Beyond that, 3D printing basically makes this completely irrelevant. 3D printing, which is going to become more and more prevalent in the United States, means that you can simply cut the parts yourself using a blueprint online. Okay, and it is a crackdown on the First Amendment to take that stuff offline. It's a real problem. It's a First Amendment issue if you're saying you're going to take the plans to build a gun offline for do-it-yourselfers at home. So is that designed to really solve a problem? Is there any evidence that taking quote-unquote ghost guns out of circulation is, number one, going to be effective? And number two, is in any way supportable under the Second Amendment? That's a really difficult case to make. Second, the Justice Department within 60 days will issue a proposed rule to make clear when a device marketed as a stabilizing brace effectively turns a pistol into a short-barreled rifle subject to the requirements of the National Firearms Act. Okay, this particular provision with regard to stabilizing braces, apparently there are 10 to 40 million stabilizing braces in circulation. Basically, a stabilizing brace is a device that you attach to the end of an AR pistol, and it straps to your arm, right? It doesn't strap to your shoulder. That would make it a rifle. Joe Biden said yesterday that it makes it more deadly than a rifle. I have no idea where he's getting this, or as deadly as a rifle. It makes it more accurate, maybe, but really it's there to kind of prevent the recoil from being as large. In any case, here was Joe Biden ripping on gun braces. Is that like, have we seen a wide spate of violent crimes using guns in which the gun brace was really the problem? Here is Joe Biden on this particular policy.
The third change, we want to treat pistols modified with stabilizing braces with the seriousness they deserve. A stabilizing brace hook in a pencil essentially makes that pistol a hell of a lot more accurate than a mini rifle. As a result, it's more lethal, effectively turning it into a short-barreled rifle.
Okay, I have a question. Does he have any data to show that it's more lethal than a normal handgun? Because the lethality of the handgun is essentially rooted in two factors: how experienced you are with the handgun and the muzzle velocity. That's pretty much it. Neither of those two things is really affected by the stabilizing brace, per se. Again, what he's doing, this is all for show. So much of this is for show. According to Daily Wire, the portion of the statement that mentioned the stabilizing brace is a reference to AR and AK pistols, which have barrels that are shorter than the minimum 16 inches required by the National Firearms Act. The statement said the pistols with an arm brace are concealable. That's really not true, because again, that means that AR pistols would be like 2 feet long. Maybe it's concealable in like a backpack or something, but certainly not on your body. The claim that weapons with a pistol brace will be, quote unquote, subject to the requirements of the National Firearms Act means gun owners will likely be forced to pay a $200 tax stamp on those firearms. Other things that the executive orders are going to do. They're going to publish model red flag legislation for states. That means nothing. Because guess what? States that don't want to pass that are not going to pass it. States that do want to pass red flag legislation already will have done it. So a lot of this is just for show. A lot of this is basically just a big nothing. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.